Jewish Dialogue. I want to thank Deborah for her partnership and her determining many of these topics and arranging for our speakers, and just for having your involvement and your helping to create all that we do with this group. So glad to share the co-hosting responsibilities with you. And before we begin with our two wonderful speakers, I just wanted to make just an administration note that we are going to be taking off of June. That we won't have a meeting of this group in June.
May.
Hopefully be back. Oh, sorry. We'll be off in May, but be back in June. Excuse me. Thank you. I forget what month it is. It's that kind of time in my life. We're off in May, but we'll be back in June. Thank you, Deborah. That's why I'm glad you're here too. So no meeting next month. This month's meeting, the selected topic has been organizing for community advocacy. And though I don't think I've met Candy, I've read over her bio, and I know that just we're gonna have the opportunity to learn from you, to hear from your experiences and your wisdom, and also to hear Michael Dzik's comments from the Jewish Federation. We've traveled to Israel together, so I maybe know him a little bit too well. But
I know him well.
It'll be interesting to hear you both speak and to interchange, and then also your questions. If things pop up and without interrupting our speakers, maybe type questions into the chat. We'll work on moderating those. But then, of course, there'll be some open Q&A at the end. So without any further ado, I just want to real quickly introduce Candy. Before becoming president and CEO of the Urban League of Greater Chattanooga in January 2021, she served as a senior advisor to Mayor Andy Burke. She led community-focused initiatives to create sustainable partnerships and external investments to advance the administration's economic, racial, and social equity agenda with the goal of improving community quality of life. Johnson also led the COVID-19 Economic Recovery Alliance in partnership with Bloomberg Associates, and co-created the Stiles L. Hutchins Black College Student Fellowship. A native of Clarksville, Tennessee, Johnson was the youngest member ever elected to public office for the Clarksville City Council. And in the meantime, still has time to go cheer on her son playing baseball, and that is phenomenal. Michael Dzik is the executive director of the Jewish Federation of Chattanooga since 2001. He focuses on community relations, bringing together people of all faiths, cultures, and backgrounds to find common ground and understanding while building strong connections and friendships. Though through programs such as the Jewish Film Series, exhibit speakers, and multi-faith panels, the Jewish Federation works to connect all of our Chattanooga community, and we are so fortunate and delighted to have both of you here today. I see that somebody did think about clicking record, so good, we are ready to begin. And I think, Candy, if you give me a moment, I'll spotlight you, and we'd like, if you're okay with that, going first.
Sure, I'm at your pleasure.
All right, without any further ado, Candy Johnson.
Hello, well, thank you for having me here, and I'm thrilled to hear about these dialogues that I had not heard of prior to today. And I know that I met with Deborah, and she's got a rich history of doing a lot of this type of work. And so thank you, Deborah, for inviting me, and I'm honored to be here with you, Michael, as well, and great to get to talk to you a little bit before today. Well, I'm from Clarksville, Tennessee, and I've been living in Chattanooga for 3 years. So most of you know a lot more about Chattanooga than I do. I have spent the last almost 4 months serving as the CEO of the Urban League, following and standing on the shoulders of civil rights giant Mr. Warren E. Logan Jr., who I admire so much. I was telling Michael, I said, you know, Mr. Logan has done so much, not just for the Black community, but for individuals looking to advance professionally, to include myself, and then also, you know, everything from social services to economic empowerment. And, you know, he didn't talk a lot about the things that he did. You saw those examples of success walking in meeting rooms across Chattanooga, serving in roles such as myself. And so I just really admire the legacy that he has left for me to build on, for what the Urban League has been focused on here in the Chattanooga region, almost 40 years, around social and economic justice for African Americans, other ethnic minorities, and low-income persons. And so, our whole goal has remained the same, and that's really about economic self-reliance, parity, power, and civil rights. And in talking with Michael, we discussed a lot of the similarities of, the Jewish struggle, and also the African American struggle, and those areas where we aligned during the civil rights movement, and just the long history. And so I'm excited to be more involved. Was very fortunate to work for Mayor Andy Burke, and I know his family has a lot of history here in civil rights, and the work that we were able to do just in the short time that I was in his administration around economic mobility and bringing more opportunities for communities of color to be successful and live the lives of their choosing. That is really hard work, and government cannot do that alone. And so we have appreciated conversations. I know Rabbi Tyndall, I don't know if she's on this call, and a couple of others have served on the faith leaders. So I got a chance to meet those individuals. So yeah, I am thrilled that I get to walk in my purpose. Being a person of color and a woman comes with a lot of different challenges in the professional space, and moving to a community where maybe people don't know about what you could bring to the table. And so it was a little bit harder, finding my place here in Chattanooga. When I moved, there was no path or anything laid out for me. So I had to spend a lot of time just getting to know people on my own, regardless of my husband's role in the community. It really was a challenge. And so I'm just very blessed that I get to serve an organization that I consider is my life's work. Growing up with a civil rights leader in my family and my grandmother. And so, again, I just appreciate the time. And I don't know exactly if you had specific questions you wanted me to answer, but I can talk for a long time. So you just have to stop me and I can talk about any and everything. But yeah, thank you again for having me today.
Candy, before I give a few remarks, would you mind telling the story that you and I talked about?
Yes, thank you for
that was just so
reminding me.
powerful to me when we talked on Friday.
Yeah, so I grew up in an all-Black neighborhood, in a pretty, I would say it wasn't really a working class, but it was a low income. I think my street was the exception, that we had blue collar working class, and then right down the street there was a horrific levels of poverty. And so you saw those disparities right in my own neighborhood for African American people, different streets, just a street over. I grew up near the university, and so we didn't have a lot of history with non-people of color in our neighborhood. What I remember were the Johns, the people who came in the neighborhood for prostitutes and to buy drugs. That was my perception growing up. And so, we were pretty segregated, if you will, as far as the social interactions. And my very first time being able to sleep over someone else's home, like a sleepover, was in 7th grade. It was 6th or 7th grade, right around middle school. And it was a Jewish family. I played basketball with Joanna Gomez, and Ray Barton was her stepfather, and he had married, and he owned a hotel in Clarksville, Tennessee. And they had an apartment inside of the hotel, which was pretty cool because we had some pretty great parties in the pool there, starting up into 8th grade. But that was the first time my mother ever let me stay overnight with a family that was outside of our race, outside of our culture. I grew up a Christian Baptist household, and that was the first time I started learning about wealth. I didn't know that you could own a hotel, and they treated me just like family. I had never experienced that before. And that was my first interaction with the Jewish community, Jewish tradition and families, and learning about Hanukkah. And I just thought it was so cool. And, I really became a part of their family. They couldn't get rid of me. I was there for every occasion. I babysat some of the younger children that they had together, but it was just a phenomenal experience to be accepted, and also for them to not judge based on the neighborhood that I lived in. Because when they would come to pick me up, I mean, like I said, we had drugs and prostitutes and crime. And so it was just like they welcomed me into their family. But little did I know at that time about the civil rights movement and some of the similarities that we had in the long-standing history of the Black and Jewish community. And so now I just thought that was, when Michael and I talked about it, it just came to me because I thought, when was my first encounter with growing a deep relation and friendship with a family that was not like mine? And it was in 7th grade with the Jewish family. So I'm still friends to this day with that family, and I think so much of them and the opportunities they gave me to be a part of their family and their culture, most importantly.
Thanks, Candy. I just thought it was so powerful. I mean, that is one of your childhood memories that has stuck with you. I think most people know me, but again, I'm Michael Dzik, and I'm the director of the Jewish Federation. I grew up here in Chattanooga, and not that I grew up in a segregated neighborhood or anything like that, like Candy was talking about. I did go to the Jewish preschool at the JCC, and then on to a Jewish day school, which we used to have here in Chattanooga through 6th grade. So I was surrounded by the Jewish community. I went to school with basically everybody who was Jewish. Now that's not to say that I didn't have other experiences. Of course, growing up in Chattanooga then and even today, it's a very Christian society. It's a very Christian community. So I had some of those experiences, but again, it was kind of insular because of me being so involved in the Jewish community. When I went off to what they used to call junior high school, I went to Tyner Junior and Tyner High School. And back then, Tyner was just a neighborhood school. And ironically, at the time, it was made up about 65% white and 35% minority, mostly African American, which I think even today, that is the makeup of the city of Chattanooga. So I had lots of different types of friends and things like that. Although, again, I stayed pretty connected to the Jewish community. My parents, my father's actually from Chattanooga, but my mother is from the Mississippi Delta, Indianola. Again, it's a very similar story to what you said, Candy, in regards to it was a segregated city. The African-American community lived on one side of the railroad tracks. The white community lived on the other side. And but her family, my mom's family, my grandfather and great-grandparents, always were very welcoming to the African-American community, into their home, into their store, and worked together. I think the community now is about 80% African-American, and as it turns out, my uncle, who still lives there, is the mayor of Indianola, Mississippi. So works really arm in arm with the African-American community in Indianola, which to me is, says something about some of my background, which is, I think, pretty amazing. I did want to take a couple minutes to make sure people understood and knew. I know there's some new faces on here who may not know what the Jewish Federation is. A nonprofit organization, part of a larger organization called Jewish Federations of North America. There's about 150 Jewish federations around North America. So if you think of any major city, we're probably there. We're not a religious institution, even though it has the term Jewish in there, and we focus on the Jewish community. We don't do anything religious. We do community service, education with our preschool. We do lots of social services. You probably in this group heard Tikkun Olam, Repairing the World, so a lot of community work that way as well. And of course, we're trying to engage the Jewish community to build a united, strong, healthy community, whether you belong to a congregation or don't, that everybody feels welcome. We put on lots of programs that Rabbi Lewis mentioned, a couple, like our film series and July 4th picnic. We just actually commemorated Yom HaShoah, the Holocaust Remembrance Day, just this past week. So we're doing programs like that. Full-time social worker, part-time nurse, transportation services, meal programs, And again, lots of discussion groups and music, again, ways that we can come together. And one of the things that Candy and I were talking about is, there's lots of ways to bring people of different backgrounds and cultures and faiths together. Of course, one of my favorite ways is through food, but also through music, through dialogue, through film, and finding things that we have in common. And through our community relations committee that we have at the Federation, we do a lot of outreach work. I will throw a little kudos to your way, Deborah. I remember when you were the director here, you started probably in your previous life, but brought to Chattanooga, the African American Jewish Freedom Seders that we did back in the late 90s here in Chattanooga, which were hundreds of people came, and we really, we broke bread together, but we shared our stories, which was so powerful. Those are the types of things that I would love to see our Jewish community be doing, finding things that we have in common, breaking bread, having dialogues, because I think we've lost some of that since the civil rights movement. Many of you might have watched the documentary film called Shared Legacies. It's a film that we showed back in January, and it's out there, so you can find it. It's really a documentary film about how the Jewish community and African American community, especially in the South, work together on civil rights. We still have a long ways to go. I think if the last year hasn't proven that, and we need to understand our history and where we want to go from there. I think that we've lost a generation or two, this is my personal opinion, that don't know so much about the civil rights movement. They don't know that Abraham Joshua Heschel and Martin Luther King Jr. were friends and truly were working arm in arm together. When Martin Luther King was having rallies and marches, and they needed people to come to be part of those marches, he called his Jewish friends in the North, and they flew down. Rabbis and others came to the South to be part of those because it was important. It's important that we treat everybody equally. And I think that is something, again, that, if you're under the age of 50, a lot of our generation, both Jews and African Americans, don't know about that rich history. So I'm using that film as a jumping off point, as a place that we can use as an educational piece. And I think it's so important that we do more together, that we have these types of dialogues that we're doing today and that we're doing every month. What is the next step we can take? Where's the action steps? And as we get to the point that we can do more in-person events, we would love to have dinners with topics. We would love for the spinoffs to be people becoming friends, people building trust with each other, and having people over to their homes for these types of things. Again, I think some of these friendships have been lost over the last 40 or 50 years that just need to be recreated because again, I think when Candy and I were talking last week, we just saw so much that we have in common with each other that we need each other. I think the as humans, we crave attention, we crave being with other people. That's probably something that COVID has really magnified, is that, we're isolated and we're not isolated beings. We don't like to be isolated. So some of the things that we would love to be doing together, again, those dialogues, let's find shared music programs, let's find shared dinner programs that we can do together to bring our communities together, not just the leadership. I think, Candy and I and others in the Jewish community and the African American community can take those leadership roles, the rabbis, the clergy, but we want to bring along our communities as well. I think that's just an important piece of what we need to be doing. So I'm going to not say any more right now. I'm sure that there's plenty more that I have to say, Candy has to say, but let's open it up for questions and comments and dialogue so we can truly have that conversation. And thank you.
Yeah, I'd like to, oh, I'm sorry.
No, go ahead.
Well, I'd just like to add, and thank you for mentioning Federation history, that once upon a time, we did a music program that included African American and Jewish students from Hamilton County schools. And we asked them to prepare traditional or favorite music and dance numbers. And we did performances at Bessie Smith Cultural Center. My sense of it is we could do that again and do it on Zoom and have an amazing conversation around music and the performances. It could be kids, it could be older, it could have both, but we have so much we could do together, and I'm really looking forward to it. That was such a wonderful program. It's true we bust in students from all over the county, but we might do even better on Zoom.
Yeah, I think, you know, to your point, Deborah, and Michael's point, you know, that information gap of what, you know, the commonalities that we had. And I'm finding that more and more with, you know, my generation and generations even after me, even to the point, like you said, Michael, about the civil rights movement. Throughout the month of February, we did a whole Sunday series conversation, and the things people learned who had never known about the civil rights movement in Chattanooga, who were from here, that are in my generation. And so not only that, but you take it to the other side of it with, you know, Jewish community being involved. And you talked about Dr. King having, you know, friends who he would get to march and support. It was in 1960, I think it was the March on Washington that I was reading about, and it was a Rabbi Prince. And he spoke right before Dr. King during that march. And I love what he said. He said, bigotry and hatred is not the most tragic problem. The most tragic problem is silence. And so being vocal, and the opposite of silence being noise and conversation, until we can get back to that table, whether it's Zoom, whether, you know, whatever that looks like in this new, in how we operate, that lost history and that lost education that we haven't shared. I think you're going to miss a whole generation of people who could do great work together and be more divided than we can together, because we know that, you know, the Black Lives Matter movement has been focused so heavily on the racial injustices. And then you have the anti-Semitic, you know, movement about the cultural discrimination and hatred. And so there are some commonalities. And I think, you know, to your point, coming together to sit down together and talk about the past so that we can form a better future together is going to be critically important.
I agree.
Andy,
I think that we don't know each other. You know, we need to know that past. I just don't think we know each other today. Our communities are parallel, and we need to, you know, have some overlap, because we do have overlap. And, you know, I'm just so excited to broaden the Jewish community's outlook, and to, from a personal level, to develop new friendships. You know, forget about this from your work perspective and my work perspective. I look forward to becoming friends with people, getting to understand a different perspective. Doesn't mean I have to agree with the perspective, but I want to hear it. I want to know about more that's out there. Because again, sometimes, like you said, you grew up in an isolated community. I kind of grew up in an isolated community. And although we have broadened our horizons, obviously, quite a great deal, there's much work to be done. And again, maybe we start with the civil rights movement, and again, we learn. I remember Rabbi Prince's remarks. You know, we just commemorated the Holocaust, and, you know, we talk about never again, and we talk about really the biggest perpetrators were the people who stood by silently, the bystanders. And that is equally true. It was equally true in Europe in the 40s. It is equally true today here in America, and really across, you know, the world, that people are silent. And, you know, we just lost an icon in John Lewis just this past year. And he talked about good trouble and, and he, you know, spot on. We need to speak up.
Yeah, and you can't underestimate the value of friendships. I think that's significant because we talk a lot about the lack of social capital for communities of color, but friendships bring also mutual opportunities for one another, for you to get engaged and for the Jewish community to get engaged in some of the activities and cultural things that we have to offer, and vice versa. And, you know, the most segregated place is on Sunday morning in congregations, places of worship, and Saturdays and other days that people choose to worship. And so when you have a community like Chattanooga who's had, you know, stalled mobility for people of color, neighborhood segregation was one of those factors that the consultants found in 2019 when the mayor launched the Chattanooga Dream Initiative that stalled mobility in Chattanooga. Neighborhood segregation. So if you can't rally around each other and build those friendships, like you said, not just based on the work, but that can help drive action, because then you're aware, then you know specific stories, specific experiences, but also just to be that helping hand to help increase access to opportunity and success. It could be that mentorship that many of us had. You know, my mentor today is a 70, well, I don't want to give his age, but he's an older white male that opened so many doors for me in my hometown that if we didn't meet in church, you know, the church that I went to when I was in college, it wasn't my family church. It was a multiracial, non-denomination congregation, and we met there, and I was 19. And since then, he has been my mentor. He's also the mayor. I think you said your friend is the mayor or relative, the mayor of a town. He's the mayor of my hometown. And, you know, he's who I go to, you know, talk about things or to talk about life happenings on a professional level, but he's always been there to open doors. But now he says I'm his mentor, but you know how that goes. You grow together. So yeah, that friendship piece is so important, especially in a town like Chattanooga, where we have so many neighborhoods that are segregated. You don't get a chance to interact and engage, where you don't have that mixed income housing and laws that don't really allow you to have incentives for people to build, you know, and get incentives for low income housing. And so, you know, there are a lot of challenges, but I think there are also a lot of opportunities to break through and move forward from those challenges that we see here locally in this community.
I see Christina. By the way, so friends, if you, the visible hand, we have a big enough group that it's hard to see everybody's hand if you just raise it on the screen. But if you can actually go to where it says reactions on your screen, and you'll see a thing that says raise hand, it'll be much easier to see. I see Christina Harley, but for the rest of the meeting, if you can try and make use of that raise hand function, it'll be a lot easier to spot the raised hands. Okay, Christina, please.
As you were talking, Michael, and I was thinking of especially where kids are concerned, younger people, what do they look to sort of bring enlightenment? And what I thought of was Adam Sandler. Okay, I remember Adam Sandler on Saturday Night Live, and he sang that song during Christmas.
He sang the Hanukkah song. Yeah.
And you know, that was actually the first time that I had seen anyone in the public eye being an entertainer who really brought me into the Jewish world. And it was such a cute song, and it was heartwarming, and it was like, wow, so this is an experience that someone other than a person who's of the Christian religion is experiencing this time. And it was like a window into something that I hadn't experienced. And and what my thoughts were as you were talking, it was just really how unaware people of our culture are with the Jewish community, and just what could be paths to bring the cultures together, and people who have a higher visibility, who are in touch with people of that generation, however they can be be visible to youngsters. That just popped into my mind.
I think it's funny, that you brought up Adam Sandler. Here's somebody who's Jewish, has his platform, and made this cute song. I think most Jews thought it was cute and funny, but I think we've recognized that for some, that might be all that you know about the Jewish community. When he started listing off names of people who were Jewish, and things like that. Now, obviously, he was spoofing a little bit too, but you're talking about finding music. Let's take it back a little bit, and music is a way into our cultures. Food is a way into our cultures. Film is a way into our cultures, and to have conversations about we can have a conversation about the Adam Sandler and how serious.
And Jack Black also, and Jack Black. I mean,
of course.
I'm thinking of celebrities who have used or who are outspoken about their culture, and it's like, wow, I love Adam Sandler. Wow, I love Jack Black, and
what about
the more that they
David Diggs?
I'm sorry?
Did you see the David Diggs Hanukkah video this year? You did?
No.
No? So David Diggs is Jewish. I think his father is Jewish and his mother is African American, or the other way around, I forget. But he did a song called Puppy for Hanukkah that was very much in the style of David Diggs. And it was fantastic. And it got a lot of play, like on the Disney Channel. And then, but you talk about somebody who really can also make a culturally significant impact with his expressing his pride in both sides of his family's culture. It was also just a lot of fun, the song. So in a different way than Adam Sandler's song has been influential, that song also has the opportunity to be, and also just him by virtue of who he is.
And jumping from, Deborah's wonderful idea during this Zoom presentation, if there are performers like that who could be a part of that whole festivity, that just can bring people together in that way. And I'm also thinking Walter Mosley, whose mother is Jewish and father is African American, and wonderful author who I love. If anybody's ever read Walter Mosley's work.
Bring David Diggs and Rashida Jones into town for something. I think that would be a fantastic performance.
And don't forget Tiffany Haddish.
Tiffany Haddish,
is a comedian. Yeah. I mean, she had a whole ceremony and went back to her, Jewish roots, and I just thought that was phenomenal. One of the things that I wanted to also elevate, if I can, is that, I came to Chattanooga in 2017, and there had been ongoing conversations about inequities and, opportunities being limited for people of color. I work with the Styles Hutchins Fellowship, which was, a brainchild of Mayor Burke to build these relationships, social capital with, Black students at the university who felt they didn't have a place here in Chattanooga to celebrate their culture. And they're right next to the downtown, which is the heart of a community. And so we spent time, with that group of students doing research, and they sent out some questionnaires to, I think it was about 200 Black professionals. And the common denominator for Black professionals that answered a series of survey questions about what they felt was missing in Chattanooga was a celebration of culture, celebration of African American culture, and even acknowledgement. But what I've noticed here in Chattanooga, it's almost like the word equity is a scary thing for some people, because they feel that we are now equal as a race, and equality and equity is not the same thing. You have laws on the books that say you are equal, but then you have inequities based on the outcomes that we see. And I think we've got to begin to talk about what those things are and how we can move forward. I mean, even in I think it was 31 years ago, if you think of wealth in white households, it was white Americans own 89% of wealth in 2019. And it hadn't changed much because it was about 91% in 1990. And then if you look at the share of wealth owned by African Americans, it's 4.2% in 2019. So yeah, we have come a long way and we've had some success, but we have to talk about what some of the root causes are. And so what the Urban League has done this year, we launched, and I invite all of you to be a part of this, is we launched the Center for Equity and Inclusive Leadership. We didn't put out a big press release or anything like that at this point, but what this center is designed to do is to empower and equip community members, so this is just diverse community members, with information and tools to overcome racial, economic, and social inequities through advocacy, so we can work together on advocacy initiatives, training, educations, and programs designed to build a more inclusive Chattanooga. And so we have the Racial Equity Institute. It's on our website right now, and I'll drop it in the chat, where anyone in the community can sign up at no cost to participate in our racial equity education workshops. And we have one that consists of a 3-hour workshop where it goes to, to address the history of how we got to where we are. It's not a talk at you, blame game. This goes deep into the 1700s to talk about how race became a term, and it was based on, kind of the economy and work and labor. And so that's a 3-hour workshop, just getting to the root causes to share why it is necessary that we have initiatives to dismantle some of these inequities that we see, and then access to wealth building opportunities. So that is available. We have a 2-day that's even more reflective, where you'll spend 2 8-hour days just going deep into the history of racism in America. So it does start in America. And it's really, like I said, it's awareness and an analysis of the root causes of disparities and disproportionate outcomes to move towards racial equity. But they don't tell you how to solve the problems or any of that. It just enlightens you. And so I would encourage you, even I think someone put the Jewish Federation or MISPA, like, we would love to have you sign up. There are 100 spots for the 3-hour one, but we're limited to 30 spots for the 2 days. So the next 2-day session is on April the 30th. So if you want,
this is virtual, right?
This is all virtual. So if you want to get in on that, it is a Friday all day. And I did it Easter weekend. And I'm like, how did that get scheduled on Easter weekend? But we were passed along that schedule. But so there are a lot of nonprofit leaders who have had this education workshop, but the 2-day gives you an opportunity to have these conversations. And so we want to build on that. And, we definitely welcome each of you to participate in that. And I'll put the link in here. But we can't be afraid to have these conversations about race, because at the end of the day, we're still faced with these inequities in wealth creation, and also access and opportunity within this city. And so I think that's where, getting back to the civil rights movement, we couldn't have achieved the things that we did with voting rights without the support of the Jewish community, standing arm in arm, hand in hand with us to achieve those. Black people, African Americans alone cannot do this, cannot achieve the goals for racial equity without the Jewish community. So I think, to your point, Michael, going even back to understanding that history, there are a lot of lessons that could be learned of how we can work together to action, to moving from conversation to action.
Yeah, and I think you and I are both motivated for that. I feel it, that let's bring ourselves together to sit down, even socially distanced now, or Zoom or whenever, to make those conversations happen. I think the Jewish community has a lot to learn about, the last 5 years, the last 10 years. I don't think we really know, that's an African-American neighborhood over there. That's what we would say. I don't know. And I feel like I'm pretty, aware of myself and who I am and my identity, but I don't know. I don't know the experience that young or middle-aged African Americans have had. And it's not that I don't care, it just hasn't been on, it just, you know, it's, if it's not there, it's not there for me. And that's where I think we need to make those things happen.
Absolutely.
I think it'd also be
Rabbi.
helpful to have some conversations about what are some of the perceptions that we come into these conversations with. And I mean, it's hard to talk about because sometimes I don't know what's being assumed about me before we enter into a conversation, and what people think I'm thinking about them and vice versa. I know it was very painful for me and some other Jewish folks this summer, as there were several prominent African-American celebrities who were making very virulent anti-Semitic comments. And, and let's just say Louis Farrakhan is somebody who has called Jews some really awful things. And it breaks down the level of ability to communicate. We don't really understand where some of these comments come from or why they're so openly embraced. But on the other hand, too, is I also don't know from the other side, are there things that, you've heard me or other Jewish leaders say or do that have been off-putting and maybe have been a detriment to the bridges that we need to build?
Was that a question for me? I'm sorry, or just
I
a
guess there's a
comment?
question, and how would you suggest that we can really have those serious conversations?
This is Deborah Ashton. I think the reality is that, as I tell folks, we all have biases, and there's been biases on both sides, as we probably well know. My sister Charlotte, who went to, and I will not name the particular professor, who was Jewish, who would call her a Negra. And when she questioned him about it, he said, "Well, you are a Negra, aren't you?" And understanding that we all have stories and we all have had people who were in power across the spectrum. The question is, how do we get past that? How do we go and deal with the fact that, for instance, when folks were talking earlier about people being silent, I remember when Charlotte and I were in undergrad, one of the nuns who was trying to, for some reason, defend the Jewish, not the Jewish, the German people during the Holocaust. She said there were some silent good people. And Charlotte and I said, we don't believe in silent good people. At the same time, we also understood, because later on in my life, I had the, I'm blocking on his name, Ziggy. He was a Jewish, Polish, um, 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 uh, uh, underground person during the World War II. And in one of his workshops, one of the things that became obvious was that in Germany, there were people who did start to speak up who were German, but they started speaking up in one sense once it was too late, because folks were relating how Germans who spoke up after a certain point in time were literally dragged out and decapitated and killed themselves for speaking up. And that's the reason why I think it's so critical for us all to understand the importance of, that old saying, nip it in the bud, because once it goes so far, when people try to speak up, it becomes horrific. And we have to speak up early. And let me say, we got to speak up on both the left and the right, because one of the concerns I will say I have, especially being someone who's in conclusion today, censorship is not inclusion, and dialogue is inclusion. We have to keep the conversation open. The biggest problem right now, to me, still to a certain degree, is that because of cable, people are so segregated, and they constantly are just reinforcing their own biases. And each side is starting to see the other side as the enemy. as opposed to trying to find common grounds. That's just my view of what's going on today. I think it's getting horrific when I see individuals who are progressive, who are encouraging blacklisting, who are encouraging censorship. And I don't understand, do they not understand that they are, in fact, the opposite side of the same coin? And we have to stop it, and we got to stop it on both sides.
Great points. You know, I'm proud that the Jewish Federation, I think we've created a space of trust for the Jewish community, and I think really for all of Chattanooga, that we have a safe space to have sometimes difficult conversations. Sometimes it's amongst the Jewish community, but I think that sometimes, you know, it's a great opportunity for us to have those types of conversations and to hear other points of view, to see where we have in common. And by the way, we can see where we don't have things in common, and that's okay too. But you're right, we have to keep those lines of communication open. We've got to be civil to each other, respectful of each other. And I think you're right. Sometimes cable has gone the other directions. And you're right, it reinforces, and I would say not just cable, but social media reinforces your own beliefs already as well. So let's open the door so we can have those types of dialogues. Again, I can speak for the Federation. We are open to having those dialogues together and having it in a safe space, whether it's just us or it's moderated or whatever. I think that's a great idea.
I love what Dr. Deborah, let's see, I'm trying to find her, Ashton said so eloquently. And I love that you said censorship is not inclusion. I mean, I think over the last couple of years, we've had some pretty horrific public comments about race and how politicized it has been. Doesn't matter what side you're on, we've all seen it. And I feel like, you know, to Dr. Ashton's point that, you know, we have to call the thing a thing. As Ayanna Fix My Life, I love that show. She always says, it's like, you have to be transparent and you have to be willing to listen to those who have had these experiences and are still having the experiences today. I mean, in part of what we're going to do in mid-fall for the Urban League is we're going to come out with a report called The State of Black Chattanooga. And it's going to look at everything from housing to education to business and entrepreneurial opportunities. It'll look at some of the disparities, but also some of the success that we've been able to have through our programs like Inclusion by Design through the Urban League. That's an executive leadership program for women and people of color, because Mr. Logan realized that there was a lack of diverse leadership at the executive level in Chattanooga, whether it be boards or whether it be corporations, but business plays a role in this as well. And so until we are able to suspend the right, as I've heard others say, to be offended by others' experiences, then we won't get there. So you have to come in with an open mind and open heart and be okay with someone having their truth be their truth. So I do think that the timing is great. Not that things have died down around, you know, Black Lives Matter, but I think it's a little more stabilized, that there's some actual policy conversations. And so we have some real tangible things that we can do, and we can all work together, I think, again, to achieve those initiatives.
Candy, is there a way that we can help mobilize these actions?
Yeah, I definitely, like I said in that report, and there are some things now, and I mean, there are over 200, probably as of last month, there were over 200 voter suppression bills in the legislatures across the US. And so we're still fighting that. You think about the Civil Rights Act of 1964 and the fight. I think there was even a time where, you know, Jewish community was out helping to get Black voters, helping to get people registered, helping to get people access. So it's going back to what we know. I mean, history repeats itself, but unfortunately it's disguised in systemic and structural racism today that, again, we don't call out enough, especially in this community, because again, people feel that you're taking a political side because you stand against injustice. And so you have to do that more. You have to do that more here in Chattanooga, because it has become very left or right. And that is the unfortunate thing. I know during the civil rights movement, it was really about humanizing people in America. It wasn't about religion, creed, political party. It was about doing, I think even in the Hebrews, I was listening to a rabbi, and he was talking about it was about really that humanization of people, not color, not being colorblind, but also recognizing that that was what the law dictated. It was civil rights for people in a sense. It was the same thing as the teachings, and I'm not anywhere literate enough to talk about the Hebrews terminology that he shared, but I thought that was enlightening. He said that was why for centuries Jewish leaders had always been at the forefront of social justice, because of the issues that they had during the Holocaust and the experiences, but then really paying it forward.
That's great. Anybody else have any questions or thoughts? That we're about 3, maybe 5 minutes left. Quincy.
Neil has a question.
Yes, I'm very interested in your the relationship between what you do and the government. We've in the last 6 to 9 months, we've started up here, and I'm in Tullahoma, which is halfway between Chattanooga and Nashville. And we started a diversity group. And what happened in the process, we were trying to connect it up with the city. And we ran into some real bottlenecks there. It didn't quite work the way we thought it was going to work. What is your relationship with the city, and how is that relationship built?
Was that for me? I'm sorry.
Yeah, Candy, it's for you. I'm sorry.
Yeah. So I worked for Mayor Burke, and so I was right in the mix of government. And I think, under the Burke administration, I feel like we did a very good job of trying to reach the community. Right before I left, we had launched something called Civic Dinners. I don't know if any of you participated in that, but it was based around dialogue, and this was led through the government. And Benwood and the Footprints Foundation funded these. So we had a platform where it was a set of questions that we talked about. I mean, it could be any questions. It could be racial justice. It could be economic, whatever topic you want to. And so we invited people intentionally of all races, creeds, backgrounds, everything, to sit down, break bread, and just have conversations. So right before the pandemic, we did this, and we were in neighborhoods from Alton Park to downtown, like all over. And we ended up meeting with about 200 individuals, residents at the grassroots level, just to have conversations. And so I have data from that I would be happy to share, feedback that people gave. And racial discrimination was one of the top things that people of all races who were at these dinners felt that we needed to do a better job of talking about and solving those challenges. So I think we can continue things like Civic Dinners. I don't know, under the new administration, whoever that may be, we have 2 runoff vote April 13th. So I think we do have to continue those type of initiatives. I know the Faith Leaders was a group that in government we met with sometimes monthly, sometimes quarterly. At least it was more frequently when I was in the administration. But we have to continue to do that, but realizing that government can't lead those initiatives alone. You have to have people to show up. You have to bring people to the table. And so I think the Urban Leagues had a long history with working with city and county government, and it's been positive, mostly from what I have, uncovered in my almost 4 months at the Urban League. So I think that should continue to stand true for the Urban League. But as far as government's role, I think they've still got to be conveners. It's just, government can't be the best implementers of all these things. So it takes nonprofits, it takes foundations and other organizations to step up.
Rabbi, I would like to address before we conclude, I know it's 5 o'clock, what Quincy has brought up in the chat. I think, and Rabbi, it looks like you just made a comment to it as well. It's, you know, as they say, it's multi-level. I think you're right, Quincy. You know, people come in with their own assumptions and biases and information. And I'm by no means suggesting that the African American and Jewish community should come, and that's the first topic we should to. I think we have to get to know each other a little bit first. We have to trust each other and build those friendships and relationships. I do think the conversation about Israel is a valid conversation. I think there's lots of misinformation that's out there, and I'm sure that I come with my own biases. You know, I'm not one that agrees with. I love Israel, but I don't agree with all of their policies. That's for sure, especially many of their political decisions. But I think those are conversations that we can and should have. I just don't think it's the first one. So I think it's a valid point that you bring up, and something for us to educate ourselves on and eventually discuss, just to see where our points of view are and see if we can learn together.
I think also the conversation, Bill, hang on just a second. The conversations are very fruitful when we talk about first how to deal with systemic injustice in our own society, because like, so Michael and I and the Jews on this call, we have various opinions on what's going on in Israel, but we don't have a vote there and we don't live there. And so our opinions are opinions, but what we can do is have action in our own home and resolve things. So I think like it is illustrative to like how we deal with issues, but it's really productive to talk about how to change our home and our state. All right, Bill.
As always, this dialogue is really fruitful and enlightening. I just wanted to mention that I dropped in the chat a YouTube video link to a CBS News documentary about a group that was and still is active here in Chattanooga called Chattanooga Connected. The reason I put it in there is because it's a model for the kinds of things that have been recommended by all of the speakers in talks in terms of how do we go about addressing this. Ms. Johnson mentioned a lot of these dialogues, and this video is one of those that will sort of give you an insight into how this thing can be conducted. And I also agree with what Ms. Johnson was saying about how this can't be a government initiative. This has got to come from the grassroots. It's got to come from the community level.
Okay, great. Thank you, Bill. Well, I guess I want to thank Candy and Michael for sharing all of your insights and your thought. And it's another beginning to more great conversations that I hope will continue. I, for one, been here 4 years, and I have a new education about the Urban League and think this is a great avenue for partnership and involvement. And I'd like to see what more I can help with from the pulpit, from our social justice work at the temple, and building on all of that work. So thank you again. Thank you all for attending and for adding your questions and insights. And let's keep doing the good work. And I guess in honor of what Michael mentioned, John Lewis of blessed memory, keep making some good trouble and make some good friends along the way.
Thank you so much. I really appreciate this.
Thank you very much.
Everybody.
Participate in this. Thank you.
And I'll put my email in the chat, so if anyone wants to reach out about any of the initiatives, we have a lot more, but I just shared a few. I'd be happy to.
I'll leave the room open for a little bit so people can copy down the emails or maybe grab those YouTube links, because I think once we shut down the meeting, those will disappear.
Candy, is it okay with you if I include the link to the workshops on the page where we put the recording of this? Okay.
Please do.
Candy, real quickly, you mentioned at the beginning, and I might have missed this, you said something that's not dependent on your husband's work.
Yeah.
Who's your husband?
Brian Johnson.
I thought that might be when you said it. I was like, oh, okay, got it.
You know, people think you have the way paved, you know, when you're married to somebody who has positional power, but unfortunately,
No.
you know, sometimes people of color don't get to benefit from that. And so that's why I said there are some challenges in Chattanooga that we still have yet to address. Yeah, so I could go deeper
his
into
work,
it.
and I appreciate yours. And
Thank you.
my
We have a
wife
lot to
is,
do.
I take a backseat to my wife next week as the Four Bridges Art Festival opens, because she's
Oh.
running that. And so all of my congregants will be at the Four Bridges Art Festival and won't be doing anything Temple next week. So
Well, great for her. I look forward to meeting her.
okay.
Candy, I look forward to working with you. Thank
Yes,
you.
reach out and we'll
And
get
good luck to
together.
you. Sounds great. And good luck to your son in his tournament.
Thank you. Have a great day, guys. Have a great week.
Thanks.